Um, so, with that out of the way, sustainability is important, right? And that's a very broad concept with many aspects in it, and one of the most obvious one is reuse and recycling. And you may be aware of this, but one of the red threads in the Beauty in Code conference history is the reuse of speakers, that we reuse one of the speakers from the previous year to come to this year's conference. So this year, Dylan Beatty here was reused. Last year, Nayari Samashonga was the returning speaker. And this year we bring this to a whole new level by reusing all of the speakers before the conference is even over, by arranging this panel discussion. And to top that off, we invite probably the person who has taken this Beauty in Code stage the highest number of times apart from me to host the thing, to sort of having the task to try to keep this discussion within some sort of frame, while I guess we all hope that all these smart people will think outside the box. So please welcome to the stage Keisha, Niall, Lisette, Dylan, Jonah, and not least Kevlin Henney.
Yeah, so we're going to have a little discussion. Actually, you know, Frederick, I was just actually I'm going to refer back to Jonah's talk. You're saying, you know, you're reusing. I'm going to prefer the one you put up in terms of the AWS extra R. Retained. We're simply retained. We're not simply reused. You know, it's just, so what we're going to do is it's kind of a discussion. We have actually no specific agenda. I'm just going to kind of ask a few random questions. But I also, it's the idea of just like getting a little bit of conversation going. And we will open up to questions later. But I'm actually going to start with, you know what? I think I'm going to start with legacy code, because we kind of had a suggestion of that from, well, we had a bit of the evolution of technology from Dylan, but there was also a recommendation from Jonah. She actually mentioned technical debt, which is one of my favorite topics. But specifically, there's the idea of pay your tech debt now, not later. And I sort of think, yeah, this is an interesting one, because it actually touches on a lot of the things that we end up actually dealing with. You go to a conference and you find out all this really cool stuff. And then, okay, so here's some stats I picked up from a study from a couple of years ago, based in the US. It basically worked out there was $1.1 trillion of legacy drag on software systems. And it was something, what helps us understand that is it was roughly a third of an organization's technology is legacy, so that's averaged out. I was surprised it was so low. But a third of an organization's code, and you go, well, that's not too bad. Yeah, except that up to 80% of the budget is spent on it. Oh, so it's a smaller part, and that's where most of the money goes. And then they further said it restricts growth and effectiveness of businesses in about 90% of businesses. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty major figure. But to broaden it out, to also think about the way that we work, there's this wonderful definition of legacy code that I came across recently from Angel Ciandones Silero. Legacy code is often defined as code that makes more design decisions than the team. And could we also define legacy process as one that makes more decisions than the team? And I thought, oh yeah, you've actually broadened out the whole organization. So, so unconventionally, I will start at the far end, given that that it's actually your technical debt quote that got me thinking. So I'm kind of interested, what are we going to do with all this legacy? Because that's most of what's out there. You know, just, you know, it doesn't have to be a specialist topic, but what are we going to do with it? Let's pay attention, because we've got five gurus here.
So you're asking what we're going to do with the old legacy system?
This stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's running the world. It's a small detail.
Yeah, it is running the world, actually. It's interesting, because I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a developer as well, who used to be my adept. I was her mentor, and now she works as an IT consultant. And then I asked her, Jonah, I saw you were in Sweeto, which is a .NET conference in Stockholm. And then she was also in JFocus, which is a Java conference. And I said, why is it there's not so many .NET developers in this area? And she said, it's because the IT government applications that we have in this area, specifically in Western Norrland, or in Sundsvall, are in Java applications, and they're still legacy. And my point is, it's to answer the question, I think it's going to take time to remove all those legacy applications. But I think organizations need to rethink about modernization in a way that they are not behind and they won't be considered dinosaurs in terms of the IT industry to keeping up with that. Because you can't always stay in the good old days. Sometimes you have to involve with the technology as well and thinking smart. Anything you want to add, Dylan? You had an interesting...
I want to take issue with the existence of the phrase technical debt. Because you'll know what a check is, right? Like magic money paper. Financial debt can be wiped out overnight with a big enough check. Anybody, any benefactor can turn around and go, bang, you have no debt. And immediately the cost of maintaining and servicing that debt is off your balance sheet. Technical debt does not work that way. And I think people kind of kid themselves, like we're gonna cut the corners now so we can get this product out by the end of the fiscal quarter. And they think that if at some point the boss, the shareholders, they turn around and go, yeah, you can pay back the technical debt, it'll be easy. And one, that never happens, and two, it never is. And we need a better, it's not technical debt, it's that you are living in a house which is on fire, and you are really, really good at remembering to squirt water in that corner before you go to the bathroom so you don't burn. That's what the process of working and, trying to evolve a code base which has a lot of technical debt is it's not fit for purpose, but you're really good at keeping it going. And the legacy code question, one assumption that just seems utterly prevalent is that when you write code, it should last forever. And other industries don't do that. They don't be like, oh, I've opened a coffee shop and now I never need to work again. The coffee will just make itself for the next 100 years. You've got to work, you've got to evolve, you've got to grift. And eventually, coffee shops go out of business and new ones come up. And there has to be a sort of a market angle where a company that is spending 80% of its budget maintaining technical debt is susceptible to a competitor that is not doing that. And eventually, the economists would argue that free market capitalism means they can come in, they can undercut the prices, and then the incumbent will go out of business because all the custom will go over here. I don't know if that's happening, and I think it'll take longer than anyone thinks. But either it's actually not that big a deal, or it has to eventually wipe out the companies that are struggling to maintain it.
So either it's not a big deal, or it's enough of a big deal that it won't be a big deal.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Yeah. Just out of interest, has anybody written a line of code this week? Anybody's written a line of code? Okay. So here's the interesting thing. I want you to just pick one of those lines of code, okay, that you wrote this week, just put a little something by it, I don't know what, and then send a reminder to yourself using the time machine that we saw earlier, 13 years from now. Because it turns out that lines of code have a half-life of around 13 years. So there's a 50-50 chance that in 2037, just coming up to the 32-bit signed time bug. In 2037, there's a 50-50 chance that one of those that line of code that we're talking about still exists. If it was in a class, there is actually there's a 50-50 chance that class will exist somewhere around the middle of this century. Again, based on the half-life. So yeah, there's some interesting stats in there. So yeah, just to scare you, by the way.
You've now got me trying to work out what the half-life of my actual code that I wrote in my career is, and I think it's closer to 8.5. Yeah. But
so yeah,
I like that. Where did the 13 come from?
A really good piece by Rob Smallshire
okay.
On predictive models of how teams develop and stuff. He wrote it in 2014. It's absolutely brilliant.
So my code is more radioactive than average.
Yeah, yeah.
Good to know.
Exactly. It's turning into lead faster.
That does explain why people, when they read Dylan's code, turn into green rage monsters.
Angry bags of meat. There it is. It's just like so. Yes, back to legacy. Or feel free to take it in any direction.
Oh no, this is not my area of expertise. I will leave it.
Okay,
legacy process.
Let's make it your area of expertise. How do you deal with teams who are struggling under legacy code and wanting to do new stuff? Like you do a team collaboration, and I'm putting you on the spot here, by the way, and I
Yeah.
feel like I'm going to make you do a question here.
I'll pay you back later.
I know. Did you ever see a fight between two multicultures going in one place? But like you're dealing with legacy code. But the thing, this question is, do people I see legacy code as code that is older than 10 years. I talk to other devs and they see code that's older than 6 months, as legacy code. And I'm wondering, like, I was talking about consulting earlier on with some people, and we were talking about the fact that you may be asked to adopt and work with this. I see teams struggle when they ask people to do things that is older than 10 years or older than 5 years. Have you seen that with cultures or when you're working with teams?
Not necessarily with cultures per se, but what I would do in this situation, one, I would hire an expert for sure that knew what they were doing on this. But two, I would start visualizing what needs to happen so that everybody's on the same page, right? Just somehow in pictures, just start to map out what is exactly the goal that we're going to and what are some of the steps. And I would just start visualizing those steps and getting the team then to move in that direction. But
I've worked with a lot of legacy code in my time. I was a consultant, so we get paid to kind of go in and sometimes fix things. And
just sometimes.
Sometimes.
Just sometimes they're I've met these consultants. Sometimes they're just paid.
Just sometimes just paid. Sometimes we actually do work. Sometimes. But like I remember, as a kind of a story, I wrote code back in 1997 in Classic ASP for a company, in a television company, where it would check to see if a server was up and running and then send an email to just let you know it was working. And then it would send an email from the email server to prove that the email server was working. And in 2017, I got an email from that service. 20 years on, it said, "Hi, your email service at this IP address is still working, well done." And I went, 20 years, what is, it was that old code. And I thought to myself, who's still running that? And they were going, yeah, no, it works perfectly, we don't need to fix it. And I was thinking, guys, I wrote that when I was 21 years old and in desperate need of money. So I would check that for being secure. And they went, no, it's fine. It's all sitting inside in this network. It's okay. And I said, listen, do you mind if I just do a quick checkup? Just check it. And I went in and I had a look, and like you said, look at that star of your code. And I went back and I says, dear God, Niall, what were you thinking? And then I thought to myself, I wanted to get paid, so it's fine. And I worry about the stuff that I've written so far long ago that I kind of go, it's still in production. Is it still there? I think of my code as disposable. It should die at some point, but they never do.
Yeah, it does. The half-life.
Yeah.
It's just a bit longer unless it's Dylan's code.
Well, in my case, it was 20 years. It was still going. But I struggle with this with companies when they're doing, like, they talk about technical debt, but I agree with Dylan on this. Technical debt is not a correct term, as it is purely like mistakes we have made and what we're going to do forward. But we're not forward-thinking enough. We can't see the future, so we just try and do our best. But like, to go back to Keisha's kind of like key thing, feedback, and kind of bringing it back in, that is very important for like this kind of, when does code become legacy according to you? There, as I said, it can be any time between 6 months or even some cases 30 years.
I'm going to broaden that a little.
Okay.
Because I run workshops where I actually ask people. I say legacy is a term that covers a multitude of possibilities. It doesn't mean you can have two people talking about legacy and they're actually talking about different things. And sometimes it's to do with knowledge that's left the building. Sometimes it's to do with in other words, we don't know what it does because whoever wrote it, we don't know the rationale. But sometimes it's actually the underlying thing that it's. So sometimes it's intrinsic, sometimes it's extrinsic. And I ask people, so I've got pages and pages of these definitions, including code written by other people. Yeah, you know that one? Yeah. What is legacy code? Code written by somebody other than me. Another one is code. One I got this week. I ran a workshop and somebody said, "Oh yeah, code that was there when I arrived." There's a and sometimes people say, code that I wrote yesterday. So people have really 6 months. I think it's really generous. But I think there's another point here that also goes back to the feedback point. Be kind to yourself. Because you're going like, what was I thinking? It's just like you're doing your best job you can. All the knowledge you need is in the future. And it's just like all the knowledge you need to do the work you're doing today is in the future. And the point you made in your talk, Niall, about the idea is like we're being asked to do something new all the time. So therefore we are working with incomplete knowledge by definition. Give yourself some grace, but the bit we're missing is the bit where you come back and say, now I know, we get the learning, but we often miss the bit that goes back that, oh, yeah, now I know better, I can and act better, but we don't get that other chance, is it? So be kind to yourself. When you look at it, don't go, oh, what an idiot. It's just like, no, you were doing the best job you could. I presume you were doing the best job you could.
I would say yes, I was.
You're on camera.
Yeah. Plead the fifth.
You can't do that. But she can. She can. She's a US citizen, Keisha. So.
Nice segue.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody would say that. Legacy.
So when I hear the term legacy code, I immediately think Java 8. And surprising to say, there are a lot of companies that still run Java 8.
I was waiting for you to say Java 5 because there's still quite a few that are running Java 5.
I haven't seen Java 5.
What Java are we up to?
Oh, we're in the 20s.
Yeah.
How old is 8?
2014. Oh, by the way, so that's the same year as Rob Smallshare's article that I just referred to, which is also the same year that Windows NT was ceased having support, and yet there are still NT installations out there.
It's new technology for a reason.
New technology to win.
And so when I think about just Java 8 or legacy code, when Jonah did her talk, she talked about the 6 R's for Azure? But what comes to mind for me is refactoring. And so in the role that I'm in as a consultant, when we go in and we help clients, we're always helping them migrate to the cloud. And so we start out with just this cloud migration strategy. We catalog the applications they have, legacy Java 8 applications, and we talk through a plan of how to get those applications to the cloud, the priority, the data, and we really set up this cloud migration strategy. So for me, getting rid of legacy is all about refactoring and modernizing and moving organizations to the cloud.
Okay, now I'm going to pick up on something else. You had you said this morning, you changed tracks in 2017.
I did.
After 2017, did you get messages, panicked messages perhaps, from, how long does it take for somebody, and this is a general question for everyone, how long does it take for you to not hear about the system that you're working on? When do the queries dry up? Did you get questions from your...
Only if you're dumb enough to leave a forwarding address.
So you just move from one to the other, and it's just like the previous team is just like, hey.
Well, I moved from one to the other. I also changed companies, so they couldn't ask me any questions anymore.
and prior to 2017, you weren't called Keisha Williams either. You've changed your identity. It's the whole, move state.
Changed my last name and everything.
That's a good trick. But I found that even that doesn't work.
Worked for me.
Now, I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to pick up some tips from you.
Where are we going with this, Kevin?
I don't know.
Okay,
I want you to take it somewhere.
Oh, right. Okay. So I do remember when I left a company like that, and so I had nominated when I left to join Microsoft. I was previously with a consulting house. We get 3 months' notice in Norway. That's how long you have to before you finish out. It's for Americans. That's like how long?
2 weeks.
2 weeks if you're lucky.
Yeah.
You will. Sorry. Can we do the Four Yorkshiremen at some point? For those who haven't seen the Four Yorkshiremen, please watch it. It's a Monty Python classic, and it explains a lot of how we think. But when we had 3 months. So when I did put in my notice, I downed tools. Just said, I'm not doing anything anymore. And I said, here are my 2 replacements. They will answer questions. And if they have questions, they'll talk to me. And when I walked out the door, they said, good luck now. That was it. Didn't have to do anything because they had 3 months of training where I didn't do the work. I learned this from pure accident because in 2004, before I went traveling around the world, I got appendicitis. And I was about to travel. I was going around the world in September. I got appendicitis and had to get my appendix out. And I had given my notice in my previous company in Ireland, and the developer came in and looked at my code and went, right. And I went away for 2 weeks to get my appendix out, and I came back and he goes, I have one question. I said, okay. He goes, what does this field mean? And he goes, I went, it's this. And he goes, cool. I went, 3 years of my life I worked on that piece of code. 3 years. And you have one question on this field? And he goes, yeah. I went, that's cool, let's go get coffee. But it made me realize that if we are there when the transition is happening, people kind of will answer, you'll spend all your time answering questions, you'll spend all your time doing stuff, instead of actually letting the person take over your baby and continue with things. And then as I found out more, I said, it is a great idea that when we quit and finish, we drop tools, we actually hand over. We don't do the handover as we're walking out the door, like, here's this thing's on fire, good luck, and then hope for the best.
That's what we do in the United States.
And it works well for you. How's that going?
See you later. Not my problem anymore.
Yeah, that's all those Hollywood movies where you've got the protagonist, explosion behind them. They don't even look back.
That's how we do it.
So that's what works for me. I found that if I stop working, and it's a great way to kind of, when you've got 2 or 3 kind of iterations of this, you get very good of saying, I'm stopping now. But Niall, you just started working here. Yeah, but I'm quitting in 3 years.
We have to start the deceleration and handover now.
Yeah. Passing the ball to you now, again.
Yeah.
I'll pass it on.
No, actually, I'm interested in your perspective, because you talked earlier on about information and documentation, all of this kind of stuff. There is that notion, and particularly you quoted from WordPress. The whole notion there, that, in other words, I was very interested in that, because what we're ultimately talking about is the knowledge that has gone in. A code is actually codified knowledge, but that's not the only artifact in an organization. And that's the issue that sometimes we have with legacy, is that person walks out the door, and actually that means part of our system's walked out the door, because the system extends outside the curly brackets into the meat space. So I'm interested in your perspective on that. We're obviously, focusing on the code bit, but actually I think there was a very good insight earlier on from some fella who keeps popping up here, Frederick. He made the point that ultimately it's about people. Tech is ultimately about people. We are part of the system. So,
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. And one is, with all this information management and documentation, I think we have to be really careful not to lose the humanity in all of it. And what I really liked about GitLab's approach was that everybody's editing the documentation. It's like Wikipedia, so everybody's responsible for making sure that it's updated. And I think that's kind of the way to go, is sort of the Wikipedia approach in that way, where everybody's responsible. Yeah.
Could I ask a question?
No.
Oh.
No.
I just did. I'm going to go again.
No, ask a question.
Yeah. Like Dylan showed, like LLMs being used as kind of digital repositories. Like, are we going to get to the point where you are going to train an LLM to not replace you, but to answer the kind of very weird questions as you leave? Instead of this, you're talking about the collective editing and wiki, but like, I'm working with a business where 10%, they're expecting 10% of their staff to age out or to pension in the next 2 years. With that amount of knowledge to go out of a company in over 2 years of that experience, and a lot of these people have 40 years experience in this business.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah, all that intrinsic knowledge goes away, do we see that as a kind of an idea, like using LLMs as a kind of a method of handover?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, when I think about today, there are a lot of code, like CodePilot. ChatGPT has things where it writes code for you, but just feeding an LLM a code base and then asking questions about that code base is a great way for someone coming into an organization to learn about the code, APIs, potentially how to use them. And so I definitely see that as an option.
It's like a handbook that talks about, It's like a handbook.
It's like a handbook.
Let me just translate. That's awesome.
So something, just talking about handover and leaving, something that I find particularly interesting is what are imagine that there's a system. I have a handful of systems which I'm really the only developer on them. They're small, they're not terribly important, but I'm the person who does everything. And all of them, I've tried to set it up so that if somebody competent had to take over unexpectedly, they wouldn't hit roadblock. Now, there's the whole, there's, I don't know what this code does. Well, that's all right, you can figure it out. There's the, I don't have any access to this system. I don't have these keys. And that's always been a really interesting thing. How do you maintain operational security while making sure that if you, win the lottery and go, yeah, I'm out of here, bye, the person who comes in has access to the systems they are going to need to be able to maintain and continue running without, we've got a question we'll get to in a second, without you leaving the keys out in the open. Because, it's tempting. You put everything, here's the README, here's the GitHub, here's the everything. Oh, no, the deployment keys aren't here. I'm not going to put those in GitHub or I'm going to get angry emails. So where do you put them? And what's the escalation path? Because, in most, probably every organization I've worked in, you get to a level of senior management who has no idea what a GitHub is, but they're the one whose name is on the titles of incorporation for the company. And you're like, look, the buck stops with you. Like, I am going to give you this, and if you want to, you can print it out and put it in a safe. And if you ever come to work one morning and every single engineer has gone to Tahiti and they're not coming back, you hire someone and you give them this envelope. And it's that kind of making sure that you're not going to hold their hand, you're not going to lead them every step of the way, but also you're not going to lock the door, throw away the key kind of thing. So, Jonah, do you have anything?
Yeah, I have something to add because it's kind of related to my experience. So, first of all, I did leave that company in good terms. And if I were to go back today in that office, I would give them a free copy of my book. Because
look at this, I wrote down all your mistakes.
Because the book that I wrote is the result of my experience where I had lessons learned. But it would be a book that I wish I had at that time when I was still learning my journey. So I did leave the company in good terms, but I did also, not just coding and all those things that I had to do, I also have to do documentation so that the next developer who was taking over after me has something to work on and continue with that legacy.
They have something to work on other than their rage against you.
Yes. But it's interesting because we're going back to the future. To the past from the future again. So I did reach out and tried to listen what happened to that system. And that system actually is still on-prem since that day I left. And I heard that it's stagnant and nobody's using it anymore because the client that we're using it here in Sweden choose to use another better system. So it's interesting that it stays there, stagnant.
Yeah.
Just like the last art that I had. Let it go.
It'll eventually turn, going back to the dinosaurs, eventually this will turn into like a carbon layer that will turn into fossil fuels and will power the next generation of software developers or something like that.
I have more to add because I switched job. I'm still a consultant, but I have a new project. It's a leading first, cloud project in a big company with 16,000 employees, and I have the role of lead cloud engineer and stuff. And I'm a very important consultant in a way that even though I don't work directly for that company, I am valued as an important asset. And I'm a person that travels a lot in conferences like this. And I don't want to build that dependency that my company or my client is worried, oh, Jonah is going to be out. Who will take care of our deployments? What if the bug comes? So what I do instead as a strategy to help my client or my customer is to mentor the person that I work side by side with me. So I do mentorship. So when I'm out right now, like since yesterday, the colleague that I'm mentoring with the same stuff I do is able to handle. And then I will be off until tomorrow or on Monday. I told her or them, if something burns out or it's on fire, call me and I'll be on call. But otherwise, I know that she can handle it because I did my job in mentoring and delegating that. So I think that for me, for us, that's a good way to not just leave the company and walk out with your angry letters or something, or some secrets, but try to leave the company in an elegant way, no matter how tough it has been for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message. And actually, what you've just described is picking up something that Niall said. It was like, not everything can be solved with technology. This is very much a human solution to when we characterize legacy, it's often about our perception. It's often about the human relationship with our software system. And so therefore, it can't all be solved technically. That's excellent. So I'm not going to ask questions. I'm going to open it up to questions in a few minutes, unless it was directly interrupting and relevant to this. Was it? Was it? In context? Yep. Okay, let's go for it.
Just wing it.
No, not at all. I was really curious about what you said, having an LLM essentially take over for a retiring employee. At what point is the company entitled to that knowledge without financially compensating the person?
Great question.
Yikes. Yep, you shot yourself in the foot there, Niall.
So there is a spectrum that already exists where it's the Microsoft moonlighting clause or something. Do you know about this? I think it's Microsoft. There's a big company out there.
Does that mean you think I read my contract?
You're allowed to, if you're an employee of this company, you're allowed to get paid to do talks in your own time as long as those talks are not related to anything you do in your job. Because they are like, no, we own your knowledge in that space for as long as you work here. And it's very, very common. You know, I've seen employment contracts which are like, we own your soul, we own your thoughts, we own your children. If you have a good idea at 4 o'clock in the morning on your honeymoon while you're still employed with us, we own the good idea. And so I think, companies are ahead of the curve in we own the contents of your brain. And I don't think they are going to hesitate to dump it into a language model and then go, well, we can fire you now, actually. Never mind waiting till retirement. See ya.
But didn't they do that with, was it, I started rewatching Pirates of the Caribbean with my kids. And
They don't have any computers in that. Just
I know, but they have a lot of CGI.
They do.
Now,
that is true.
Davy Jones turned up, the octopus.
Yeah.
And, is it Bill Nighy plays that? Yeah. And he turns up in the end credits of the last movie. So not going to ruin much for most people. However, he didn't know he was going to be in the movie. And they used his previous material that he had generated to do that. And does he get credit or does he get paid for it? I don't know.
So the precedent, which goes back to something in your talk, was Back to the Future 2.
Yeah.
Oh my God! That's exactly what I was sitting here going like, yeah, there's a precedent for this. It's Back to the Future 2, but it was
Crispin Glover,
yeah.
who played George McFly, Marty McFly's father,
Yep.
wanted a lot of money to come back for the sequel. And the studio said no, and they used footage they'd shot for Back to the Future Part 1. If you know the movies well, it's the scene where they're at the high school dance. So all the footage of George McFly was shot for the first movie, and then cut, and then they basically got it off the floor and spliced it into the other movie, and they used a body double, and he sued the studio. And said, you cannot use me in this film because you didn't pay me for this film. And there was a lawsuit, and I think it's called the George McFly clause, says if we hire an actor for a film, we are only allowed to use footage that we shot for that film. We're not allowed to use it. Now that works for footage. That works for analog celluloid film. Digital, you get into a whole new thing because a lot of what we're seeing in the industry now is contracts that didn't anticipate digital. You heard of the band De La Soul? So when De La Soul were selling records and CDs in the 90s, they had their lawyers clear because they use hundreds of samples, and their lawyers went through and cleared them painstakingly for radio, for television, for vinyl, for compact disc. Streaming comes along, and they're like, well, you didn't clear them for streaming. And they're like, we didn't know what streaming was. How would you write a contract in 1992 which says Spotify MP3? Those things did not exist. And so, and I suspect the Davy Jones thing is very similar, is that the contracts that exist to govern this kind of reuse of material predate what we are now able to do, and the lawyers haven't caught up yet. And, law doesn't work until someone wants to fight it out in court and a judge actually says this is how it happens. So every time you see in the news settled out of court, like when a self-driving car hits a pedestrian, it's because they don't want the legal precedent. They want a nice, quiet settlement that doesn't actually update legislation. So, yeah, I don't know about the Davy Jones thing. But
this sounds like an ethics question.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Dylan was saying, I don't know how it is over here, but in the United States, like whenever you work for an employer, you sign like a 50-page employment contract that no one ever reads. But late last year, I found out that what I signed basically says that my employer owns, like he was saying, anything that I create. So even if I'm working on a side project, off hours, using my own personal laptop, they still own any and everything that I do. Mm-hmm. And I was just blown away because I do a lot of side work, and an incident came up, and I'm like, I don't think that's right. I know I signed it, but like, who reads the 50-page employment contract that you have to sign or you don't get the job? And so it's definitely, it definitely goes back to ethics, but in the United States, like for me, there's nothing I can do because I signed it and I agreed to it.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one because it is one of those ones that for different. So I work for myself, so that I do have. There's a whole bunch of other things I have to worry about, but it's mostly NDAs that I deal with. But way back in the day, I actually turned down a couple of roles because I went through this because I'd actually done it with one company. I said, I think it was just like, oh, I do a couple of things at conferences. I also write for magazines because that's a thing. For those of you for those of you who are really young, a magazine is like a bunch of web pages that have been printed out and stapled together and has had an editor and quality control. It's quite glossy and is filled with adverts that don't move and you can easily ignore. But that whole thing is just like, no, that's me, and I actually got clauses taken out from a couple of places, but that's because I was immediately very sensitive to that, because it was just something a friend had said, and a couple of other organizations, I said, no, you don't own this, well, we can't say, we're not going to change it for you, because we're big and important. That's great for you. I'll see you. So yeah, it is one of those things, but as you say, legal documentation is getting bigger and bigger, particularly in the States, because, I mean, lawyers are what, 50% of the population?
That sounds about right.
You know, any other thoughts on this minefield that we are walking into and through without realizing that we are actually in it?
I mean, one small detail. I have public liability insurance because, like Kevlin, I work for myself, and my insurance company are like, "Do you do any work in the United States?" I said, "Why?" They said, "It'll double your premiums," and I was like, I can just not work in the States, like that's fine. Like I just not do it. Because it is a very, very litigious culture. I don't know why, it just is. So,
yeah.
Yes. I have something to add. I mean, but maybe out of topic of what you asked, but it's related to the talk of Dylan in terms of books written by AI. And I was impressed to see that book you hold in your hand was written by AI, because I buy a lot of books on Amazon, and it's hard to detect if it's written by AI. I have to follow that user, I think. Yeah. But my point is that, speaking of the AI and books and me writing the book, when this ChatGPT came, and I actually work with O'Reilly. O'Reilly, they are like an international big tech publishing company. And then they asked me, when I submitted one of my drafts in the chapters, I was still writing this before publishing, they said, Jonah, one of your chapters in cloud computing is detected by our system that it was written by AI. And I said, what? Because I know it is my own words. And there's a bias there related to your talk that AI, O'Reilly explained to me, you know what, this is not true. AI is lying. Because I know I wrote this book. I didn't use ChatGPT or AI to write this. And then I asked O'Reilly, why? Why is it detecting like that? I did the hard work on this chapter, this part. So they said something like, I'm not sure if he got it, but they said something like, you wrote too professional. There's something about my tone of writing that AI, their tool for proofreading of AI generated content was detected that my writing is the same, it was written by a robot. But I was just probably writing it perfectly. I think so.
So there, you
you
now
can-
have,
yeah.
you know, so this is what you need to now put on your CV. You know, I have been described as too professional. I have been described as perfect. I have been described. No, these are, you know, you take what seems like a weakness and turn it into a strength. I think, you know,
Yeah.
I've just answered the question in every interview. What's your weakness? I'm too perfect.
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm very spontaneous and very transparent. It's just like I'm thinking out loud right now and say, like, as a writer, how would I, like, keep my credibility as a writer, that I write my own content based on my experience and knowledge, like they just say Azure or cloud migration, without AI taking over, like saying that, hey, Jonah is lying, I'm correct, because I'm AI, I'm the robot, but I have my experience, I'm human. So I'm still in the process of that. Yes, yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to take a photo that would never be seen again.
Yes. Do you want
Maybe the future is everyone, whenever you're writing a book, you have a camera running so they can see the crying and the cups of tea and the deleting and the bit where you hate yourself and the bit where you break the key.
remember not to wear the extra finger.
You know, just remember to
no,
finger.
In AI generated. Just as a historical point, it's an interesting, the idea of having something that is effectively you in a particular context. I've just been rereading Ian Banks' culture books, and I first came across that idea in a book called Accession, which was written in the early 90s, and then Alistair Reynolds, for those of you who are science fiction fans, kind of had a similar concept in Revelation Space, written a decade or two later. So it's an idea that's been explored.
Revelation Space, it's one of the best science fiction books ever written. Go out and buy it, like now, and read it.
Yeah, in fact, come to me and Dylan afterwards for some science fiction book
We'll be in the bar.
We have, yeah, and the more we drink, the more we recommend. You know, it's just like we've been exchanging. But yeah, so no, that was a great. So we are now in the AI space, that we have wandered in there. So thank you very much for just nudging us in there. So let's pick up on the bias thing, because I'm kind of intrigued that, because at one level we're talking about fighting bias, or balancing and understanding and being able to detect it. But that's also present in the first two talks of the day, was that idea of, you know, in some way, we are wired with bias. You know, that's a thing that we do. You know, it's Kahneman talks about system one type thinking, system two. The idea that we kind of have these, you know, heuristics that are nice energy-saving shortcuts when they're working fine, but if they fire too much, then actually it pushes things out, and that's maladaptive. But we also see that when we have statistical-based systems, it's just like, here's a bunch of data, you know, figure stuff out, pattern recognize, and then we're going to ask a bunch of questions or ask you to do something. We get a reflection of biases and even an amplification. And so wherever we look, we see biases, particularly confirmation biases. Wherever we look, we see that. But isn't it interesting that also we have a lot of jobs that are based on biasing? Intentional biasing. We're fighting a war. I mean, what is SEO? SEO is your job, if you do SEO, is to bias something. The whole profession of marketing is actually a biasing profession. So we actually have, within the very system, it's just like, yeah, we need to eliminate bias. By the way, half the system is fighting you because it's actually, people are being paid to bias systems. So, I don't know, I'm just throwing that one out there. What are we going to do? We're just going to, you know, just kind of, you know, are we going to be, give up our optimism? Are we going to sort of say, no, actually it's worth the effort in our software systems, and actually we'd like to spread that through broader society. You know, are we going to bring down, high-octane capitalism and have a post-scarcity culture? I mean, you tell me.
I can spin that into perhaps a slightly more nuanced question, because I was talking to Niall last night about submissions for NDC Oslo and the number of AI-generated abstracts that are now submitted to conferences. And literacy and, you know, good writing has been a heuristic for education, reliability, credibility for as long as any of us has been alive. And suddenly now we're like, people who aren't actually good at their jobs can give us good text. And so they can skip the filter of, if you can't write, you don't know what you're doing. And how do we as a society, you know, what do we use as a proxy if we can't rely on literacy anymore? And should we ever have been doing that in the first place? Was that a fair test of somebody's, you know, the idea of conferences select speakers based on you write 2 or 3 paragraphs, and we assume that if you can write 2 good paragraphs, you can speak for an hour. And that's often not true. What do you think?
Yeah.
That sort of goes back to what Jonah was saying, where they thought the AI wrote her book. And so as I was reading the AI Act that's here in the EU, there were clauses where you had to label things as deep fakes, or you had to label content that was generated by AI. So I do think at some point in the future, there will be like regulations where you specifically, it's going to be a law where you have to say this content was generated by AI or co-created with AI. We're not there yet, but I think we will eventually get there. So that just came to mind.
I think also, at least O'Reilly, the publishing company that I work with, when ChatGPT came, they started actually looking into writers, like they think about integrity of publishing and the content because they're known to give value. They work with schools, with big organizations, and I did heard from the project manager that I worked with that they're really scanning and working with authors, checking on the drafts if this is AI-generated content or this is the written really by the author. But I think there is also they are still also adapting to this new change that we have today in terms of writing. Kids, can you imagine? I don't have kids. I have a dog, but he don't go to school. He does training with me, but I can imagine. I used to teach kids programming up north in Sweden, but I was also a student myself. But I can imagine how it is for kids learning new topics or new categories of subjects today with the ChatGPT available and internet in front of them. So I think it goes back to parenting, I believe, and taking control in a good way. I cannot say so much about parenting because I am parenting a dog.
But the minute your dog starts, ChatGPT,
yes.
pause. Yeah.
I just have an
But you can add something if you have.
Well, there was that classic thing in the 1990s, that cartoon on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And it's just like, well, now the dog can actually properly deep fake and, join your virtual co-working session. And, it's just like, you don't know.
Could you imagine that inside your thing?
Well, we had the lawyer that showed up as a cat.
Oh, so we've had the reverse. So yeah, people have turned up as animals in the last few years.
The really bizarre idea there is there a hybrid of because dogs are intelligent as animals. They are loyal, they are enthusiastic, they are playful. Could a dog plus a language model result in output which didn't look like it was written by AI? Because there was just enough kind of organic creativity.
Have we just gone into the AI version of 1,000 typewriters and 1,000 monkeys could write Shakespeare?
So that's actually how Shakespeare got written.
Got it.
People often there's an infinite number of monkeys that wrote Shakespeare. That's our timeline in the universe.
There was a wonderful quote a number of years back. I think it was I don't know, it was 20, 25 years ago. Somebody said, there is this idea that given a sufficient number of monkeys in sufficient time, just randomly bashing away typewriters, they produce the complete works of Shakespeare. But now, thanks to the internet, we know this is not true. Okay, so
I had a question over here.
yeah, we are going to open this up to questions. So let's spot a question over here. Hello, a microphone is flying towards you even as we speak.
I have so many comments. I don't know where to start.
Don't forget, there is the extended version of the panel discussion is in the bar afterwards. So
thank you.
So yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't understand the problem with Riley as you describe it. You were flagged about the fact that you were suspected to be a language model written by AI. I mean, there is not a single text produced professionally that hasn't gone from journalisms to books to plays that hasn't gone through the scrutiny of having editors, everything like that. So I kind of react to the fact that you talk about integrity. Because, how many of us haven't studied at university and have, some supervisor say, if you change this and that, basically everything, you'll pass. And you wouldn't blink you would just do it because you want to pass. Or would you have that integrity? So I think it's exaggerated the worry about my integrity as a writer, because there will always be people, hopefully, checking it, as it's always been like that. So I don't understand. And the second part is replying to you, and that is, you said, from now on, you can have people who don't know anything about the subject at hand writing things. I'd like to turn that around. How about AI being a democracy, a part of a democracy? You have a lot of people who have learning disabilities, for example, or writing issues, who are very skilled. Now, their knowledge can be lifted and available to all.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to the second part, absolutely yes. I think the difficulty comes when we as a society try to use it intentionally as a selection process. Like you got 2,000 submissions for a conference and you get to pick 100, and you do it based on writing. Niall.
Yeah, because I was in this. So let me give you the scene. You've got 2,053 sessions for 93 slots from all these speakers. And after the 7th iteration of in a world, in an ever-changing landscape, and they use the exact same lighting styles, symphony, the same kind of patterns, and it's you can spot. The problem is then, are you as a person who says, can this person deliver if they don't write it themselves? Now, I agree with you, because one of my greatest experience as a developer was being humbled into understanding how people deal with computers when they are not fully able. I wrote scanning software that had everything it needed and was designed to purpose, and I got feedback that it wasn't working correctly for the people that I was like, and I went in, 24 years old, this is rubbish, they must suck. He says, come down and see it. I said, okay. So I see this thing, and I see this gentleman who is partially sighted, and he's going to work in the local county council, the equivalent of a communa or whatever, and he's been given a job where he's earning money by putting paper on here, scanning the system, and transferring it into a document management system. Now, I don't know if you've ever kind of had that experience where you've been told, you wrote crap software because it doesn't work for the people it's going to work for, and you realize that you're an idiot because of the thing you wrote was not designed, or you didn't get the right specs. And I sat there and I said to him, asked the gentleman, I said, what would make it happy for you? And he goes, this. And I said, so we went off and did that. Now, the fact is, I'm back on the other side of this again, where I've got new technology that is being used, and people want to kind of come to a conference, and we want to provide it the best conference for them. But our gating system, our choosing system is not correct. So we need something to help us to do this. And I kind of we need that to catch up for ourselves. And I saw that, and I sat there as a person going, I have to be rational. I have to not be biased. I can't just be so annoyed right now that everyone's using ChatGPT, and I feel like you're wasting my time. Can I look beyond that? And I couldn't. I needed I needed a secondary thing there. I needed, like, can you show me a video? Can you give me anything? And I researched, and if you imagine it takes, like, if we say 6,000 seconds, because I've read 2,000 submissions, or one every 3 seconds, like, that's a lot of time. Now I'm using about 2 to 3 minutes per session that I'm investigating. I was struggling to find a good method for this, and I really agree with your suggestion that people who would normally be excluded from this are now getting a voice and getting a better thing. The problem is that everyone else is using it as like to get the advantage as well. So how do we discern? And I don't have a way. I can't flag and say, by the way, I'm blind, or by the way, I'm have a mental disability, so therefore I can't use. Now, if they had put that in, I would probably be more sympathetic, but not everyone does.
Yeah, it's an augmentation. Here we're talking about that. Can we distinguish between our use of technology, let's not just pin it down to AI, our use of technology as augmentation or as replacement, and potentially, it goes back to the integrity issue. My own personal experience with a couple of these things is the plagiarism space, and I helped somebody deal with plagiarism, and we've just created a system for automated high-speed plagiarism, which is unfortunate in some cases that it turns out. But yeah, no, this is a good question. So this is, by the way, I think we can keep this one running. We're going to keep this one running to the end, I think, probably, because there are 2 questions there.
So one thing I was just going to add quickly, when I was at school, 12, 13 years old, I was using WordPerfect for DOS to do homework, and it had a spell checker. And this was when it was unusual for school children to use a spell checker, because most kids handwrote their homework. And the deal that I came to with the school was I wasn't allowed to use it for English classes, because I was allowed to use it for geography homework and history and whatever, but in English, they're like, we actually want to grade your spelling, not how good the spell checker is. But now spell checkers are everywhere, and I was about to say clearly have not brought about the downfall of civilization, but that's maybe being a little optimistic. But I don't think it was all the spell checkers, you know?
Yeah, for those of us of a specific age, you know, you probably said, you should learn mathematics because you'll never have a calculator with you every time.
Well, I'm going to say, actually, there's an interesting thing, because it goes back to the point about disability, that there was a change in the UK, there's a thing called SPAG. Nothing to do with spaghetti. SPAG, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. SPAG. And kids are rated on this, and my younger son is quite dyslexic. Unfortunately, they changed the SPAG requirement for a number of exams just before he got to them, just before he was 16, which was fortunate, because there's a whole notion there that going by the subject, it's just like, yeah, in English, it's a case of like, well, you keep getting this wrong. Maybe there's a reason you keep getting it wrong, and it's nothing to do with a kind of a learning thing. It's nothing to do with laziness. It's in your wiring. So there is an issue there, and so yeah, it's a difficult thing. Other thoughts on this? Because I think this has opened up a really, really interesting space.
Yeah, it's interesting because you did mention integrity there. It's my first book, first-time writer. So during the final phase of my writing project, which is about 18 months in my spare time, I also used AI tools in terms of plagiarism checker, because I want to make sure that the words that I wrote is not something that will be flagged as plagiarism. So it's interesting listening to the balance. It's like, it's so ironic that we have ChatGPT, Copilot to help us code, and plagiarism checker with AI, and Grammarly to check our grammars. We use the AI tools to help us, but at the same time, I personally, my perspective, for me, my integrity can mean different from somebody else. My integrity is that I wrote something that I know I have experience of that I want to share to others. And at the same time, I want to use these tools to help me with my productivity. And finding that balance and handling with the challenge is actually is a learning journey itself in terms of adopting AI in my own productivity as a writer, as a developer. But I can imagine there are also challenges that each of us trying to reflect and adapt with the technologies that we have today. Because we want to, even though AI is getting popular right now, Microsoft talks a lot about it, and even other tech giants like Google have their own type of AI. But to me, I think we need to keep ourselves human while utilizing the AI tools we have available, keeping the balance. In Swedish, we call it lagom. Not so much, not so little. Yes.
Keisha.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and I just reflect personally about, like, for me, the kind of person I am. Like, I could never put my name on a blog, a presentation, or anything that I personally didn't write. So submitting to, you said NDC Oslo, an abstract that was written by AI, I could never do that. And I know people can, and people do, but for me, I'm just not wired that way, because at the end of the day, I would have to be on that stage and I would have to deliver, and it's my name that's on the line. And so that's just me.
Which is a very fair thing, and that's part of the thing when we're looking at that. Can we trust that the person who is doing this will be able to deliver? And it's not that we don't trust that you won't write it or won't do it correctly, but if an AI generation, like the selection process is, it's nearly like you know, that kind of, buy now, do something. We're at 0 minutes. Okay, I'll be 10 seconds. 15 maybe. But it is very difficult. So
You're Irish. I know how long Irish seconds are.
All right, I'm going to the pub.
No. Go.
So it is very challenging, and like you'll have people say, "Oh, I wouldn't do that," and that's fine. But there are cases where if we take a step back in different situations, you will do things where others would say not and whatever. And we appreciated that. We were flattered by that we had so many. It was a little bit frustrating because you're trying to filter and give people who have done and we know can deliver. They may have used AI. So I'm a native English speaker. A lot of people who aren't are applying to this and will be speaking in English. I'll assume that they can speak English, but their written English may not be as fancy as a native English speaker. So they might run it through ChatGPT to verify and get a little bit more flourish or a little bit more pizzazz. Great. But then it just gets tagged, or we see it and we go, oh. And I think they'll probably have to use ChatGPT to help me with the language, maybe a little bit easier. And I hope that doesn't become the standard then, and I have to deal with that. So there you go. That's my 10 seconds.
Any additional closing thoughts?
So it sounds to me like a lagom language model, so what we actually need.
A what now?
Not lagom, not too little, not too much.
Oh, okay, got it.
Not large language, lagom. Swedish lagom.
Yeah, no, that is one of the words. That is one of the words that's been doing the rounds the last couple of years, that the rest of the world needs more of that. So on that note, we will be continuing the conversation here, there, downstairs, wherever you can find us. I'd just like to thank Keisha, Niall, Lisette, Dylan, and Jonah. And of course you.